Today, I want to officially start by introducing myself. My name is Sadia, and I am a gatherings coordinator here on the Preemptive Love community team. And what that means is that I help peacemakers begin, peace building gatherings in their own local neighborhood. And then I also teach workshops like these. And so we're doing a lot of like bridge building, community building work, where we're helping encourage and support each other. And I am here with a couple of my other colleagues. Nigel, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Sadia. It's always just so wonderful to be here with you. My name is Nigel. I work for Preemptive Love. I'm on the community team. And specifically, my program is called Generation Peace. We believe in education, equipment, and empowerment for the next generation of peacemakers. And we're a place of partnership for the next generation of peacemakers. So, like, what does that mean? Essentially, we create spaces to either host events or create educational content that deals specifically with issues that are affecting millennials and Generation Z. So I'll be here today kind of representing my generation, which I'm always happy to do. And I'm looking forward to having a really awesome conversation with you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nigel. We're also here with Efnan, and she is our project manager, and she's like our backbone. So we just want to acknowledge that she's here, and our program director, Faith, is also here too. So if you have any questions, if you have any issues, comments, reach out to any of us at any point. So why did we pick this topic? So we often talk about peace and justice and equity. We often go to the topic of race, sex, and socioeconomic, educational disparities. But we also felt that one that is often overlooked is ageism. And in the last decade, with the growth of social media usage, and people are more connected online, we can really see that the conflict between generations is growing. Even when we think about the workplace, we are exposed to different generations, and that has come with its own challenges, especially during the pandemic, where everybody's online and we're trying to navigate this thing that we're trying to do, right? Also, obviously, within our own family structures, we have generational exposures, right? So what we try to think of is like, talking to our old, very conservative grandmother, or trying to relate to our very liberal Gen Z niece, or the flip. It could be true too, right? Your grandmother might be super liberal and you might be conservative. So as conflict arises in all these, we believe that communication to attain peace is so necessary. It's so important to note that, conflict isn't bad, and it's just an opportunity for us to grow and have lasting peace. And we also realize that culture plays a big part in all of this. So, for example, when we think of a boomer, when a boomer shows up to work, they're used to waking up, they're used to, the grind, while somebody who is a millennial who might show up for this same job might put more importance to their mental health. And, both are right. Both need to figure out how to work together and actually like reduce the gap of that we have created because of the generational difference. So where does peace building fall in all of this? How do we, address this gap that we're seeing by actually listening to each other and, relentlessly humanizing each other and trying to rid ourselves of these stereotypes that we may have. But we don't want to give too much away on the topic, and we're going to go into our speakers and they will actually give their perspective as well. So I would like to throw it over to Nigel at this point.
Yeah, so I heard recently someone said that conflict isn't bad when you're good at it. And I love that this is an invitation that we like to start most of our workshops and time together with surrounding the posture of peacemaking. And it's what we call the Love Anyway invitation. And I just want to read it before us as kind of a place for us to just kind of park for a second before we even get going. And these words, they'll really speak to you. So this is the Love Anyway invitation. We are here today to celebrate that we belong to each other. We come here with our whole selves. We are brave, we are courageous, and we relentlessly humanize everyone. Let me read that again. We relentlessly humanize everyone. We all carry wounds and stories, fears and joys, different backgrounds and cultures. And we're gathering for the purpose of listening, understanding, and nurturing relationship. This is the way that our world is remade. When everyone has a voice, has a place to be heard, they're known, valued, and loved. May our friendships grow deep and push us all to love anyway, even when we have yet to understand each other. In this space, in our time together today, we seek to begin to heal all that is tearing us apart by pursuing peace through relationship and action. So yeah, that's the Love Anyway invitation. And I hope that something there speaks to you and that you'll carry it away with us in our time today.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Now, as we also begin, we have these guidelines / ground rules on how we treat each other. And we use this in all of our gatherings, in our workshops and community events. It helps us stay grounded and it reminds us that we belong to each other. So, these are things that we feel like you could put in your back pocket and actually use this as you talk across the divide, and what that divide looks, it just varies, right? So our first thing is listen silently to understand, not to offer advice or try to fix each other's struggles. We are not here to convert each other. We are here to listen, learn, and celebrate our unique identities. We use the words I and me instead of you and we when we are sharing. We take space and make space. We are mindful of our sharing and we prioritize listening over being heard. We all are at a different point in our journey. No tone policing, no shaming for using the wrong language. Take the heart and spirit of what a person is saying. And I like to just pause a second. I feel like this is very important in generational conversations because, often we aren't saying the right things, and because language is changing, the way we view things is changing. As a mom of teenager kids, I get policed a lot, and this is something that I feel like that we really need to pause and take note of. Our next ground rule is you're welcome to speak your truth, but so is everyone else. You won't always agree, and you might even be offended. This is your chance to love anyway, to practice active listening, building relationship, and ultimately learning from each other. We can disagree with somebody's ideas, beliefs, or opinions, but we may not disagree with their experience. And then our last one is everything that is shared here is confidential. And I say that with a little asterisk, like personal stories are confidential. However, what you learn from this, if you feel like others can benefit, by all means, share what you've learned, because ultimately we are here to spread peace and spread, tools to help bring peace in our neighborhoods and communities. So now I am going to throw it over to Nigel again. So we're going to play this short Instagram video, and this kind of shows how we are approaching this topic.
Millennials are turning 40?
No, he's not handling it well.
I'm getting close to 30 and I'm not complaining.
You will.
Why? Because 30 is basically when the warranty runs out. It's like when the new iPhone comes out and the old one stops working. Except you can't buy the new model. You just keep screwing with the parts until it won't turn on anymore.
That's depressing.
Well, millennials and depression do go together like Tito's and toaster strudels.
Those don't go together.
Agree to disagree. So if all that's true, what happens when you turn 40, 50, 60?
Does anyone remember if I took my Thursday pills already?
It's Monday.
Oh.
Yeah. It's coming for us all. Millennials are turning 40?
No.
Okay, now I love this video for a number of reasons. One of my favorite writers, he was talking about when he was a child, he found that the best way to enter into an adult conversation was by way of a joke. And so I think that this video is a perfect example of the disparity that exists between generations. It's clearly, stereotypical, it's poking fun, it's like sprinkling a little bit of truth in there, and just really reminding us that if you don't have proximity to a person, it's very easy for you to judge and to create your own narrative, or, as we've all done, at some point in our peacemaking journey, believe a narrative that we've heard somewhere along the way. And so you see a lot of studies that are released right now about multiple generations, every generation that's represented here. And often it's about those stereotypes that we witnessed and saw in the video. But I think that the big takeaway here from the entrance to this, very grown-up conversation that we're having today is that proximity to people can completely change a narrative. And so it's easy for us to believe the things that we've heard. It's easy for us to be ageist in the conversations that we have or the judgments that we pass, and often maybe even receive these things from other people. But the big takeaway here, just through observing this very funny yet truthful video in some ways, is that proximity to people makes the biggest difference in changing the narrative.
Thank you so much, Nigel. So right now we want to actually get a little vulnerable. So if you would like to put in the chat box what stereotypes you may have for generations that are not your own, or maybe you have stereotypes about your own generation, now's the time. So what stereotypes have you witnessed? What stereotypes have you yourself perpetuated? So if you want to put your answer in the chat box, that would be wonderful. Okay, so Nigel says the one he's heard most often is that millennials don't work hard and we are emotional and entitled. Aaron said older generations are fearful or reluctant to change. Okay. For Gen Z, that's one. Younger millennials are lazy or entitled. That's one that Nigel said too. Anyone under 30 who doesn't want to work. Gen X is a slacker generation. Okay. Boomers and racism. Yeah, see, there's a lot out there, right? And we're trying to break the stereotypes. So thank you for sharing so vulnerably. So boomers are very judgmental. I've heard that millennials and Gen Zs are lazy and entitled. That's coming up a lot, right? They've built this country and everyone else should do it their way. Boomers and homophobia. Gen Zs are the mystics in our midst. This is a good thing. Okay. All right. Yeah, I love the way there's a lot of common things and there's a lot of like uncommon things. So thank you so much once again for sharing. So we want to begin and we want to introduce you to our illustrious panel. Today we have Cheryl, Alex, and Nigel, and we're going to start off with Cheryl. And what I would like Cheryl to do is just introduce herself, where she is based, and what's one thing about her generation that you feel people don't think they realize, right? So Cheryl, if you just want to come on.
Yes. Hi.
Thank you.
I'm Cheryl Hansen, and I'm currently in Nashville. I will be moving to Portugal in just a few weeks, but currently I'm in Nashville. And I have worked or volunteered in the nonprofit sector for all my career. And currently, well, for the last, 3 or 4 years, we've had a gathering, Lana and I, and it's turned into an international gathering that is strictly online, and it has been amazing. But as far as something that maybe other generations don't understand, and I come from the boomer generation, barely, but I do, is something that maybe we don't understand about all the generations is you can't group us all into one thing. There are some boomers that stick their heels in, and this is the way I've done it, and I don't, I feel threatened, my way of life feels threatened. And then there are those that are activists, starting businesses, learning new things, moving with the world that is changing so quickly. So gathering us all into one group and making assumptions is truly unfair, but that's unfair of any age group, to be honest. And so I think that would be true for all of us, but that's my take.
Thank you so much. And I think, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Like, we shouldn't box ourselves in. So next we have Alex. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself and let us know.
Community team for having me. I'm a content manager at Preemptive Love, and I'm Gen X. So I was joking around that our generation was the slacker generation. I think Reality Bites, the film, had a lot to do with that. But it's an interesting generation because we were pre-computer and then had to adjust and work with technology, whereas later generations kind of grew up naturally with it. We're also a generation that women who are single or divorced, they really have a lot less for retirement, which is a differentiation with baby boomers who are staying in their houses longer, which is having an effect on the housing market for millennials. And in between there, Gen X is kind of lost, but specifically the women of Gen X. And so this idea that we're slackers isn't exactly true. It's just that economically we hadn't been empowered as third wave feminism helped with millennials, and we didn't have the job security or Ks and long-term relationships that our boomer forefathers had. So we're sort of here in this gray murky area trying to find our place between two generations that are a lot larger than ours, and trying to figure out how to go forward as the world around us had a lot of accelerated change within a 17-year span.
Thank you so much, Alex. As a fellow Gen Xer, I completely agree with everything you said, and I completely. It just shows a perspective that intersectionality of being a Gen Xer and a woman, how that can impact the way you or we work through the world. So I really acknowledge that and then agree with it. And then next we have Nigel, who you just heard from earlier, and he will share about his experience.
Yes, I love being a millennial. I was recently reading online, and there's this really interesting Twitter thread that talked about people who were born between 85 and 95, and essentially stated that we're the in-between generation, the one before the internet and the one after technology took over, how we knew how to use a floppy disk in our computer, towers, but we also know how to use hard drives. We got to see radio and TV and Mario and the PlayStation 4, the tape deck and the 8-track, but we also got to see CDs and streaming. And so I just think that it's really important to acknowledge the beauty that exists within each generation, because all of our experiences are so separate but similar too. We all have a very unique vantage point and a very interesting purview. And I think the last thing that I'll say goes towards unity, and that's really the reason why we're gathered here today, to find the peacemaking in this intergenerational conversation. A lot of the people that I'm having conversations with, I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm Christian, however you want to identify that. Some of my best friends are agnostic, atheist, Muslim. I've got friends from a variety of cultures, communities, ethnic groups. And one of the things that I'm discovering as it pertains to being in a particular generation, having this conversation, is that so many of us, if not all of us, have this unified desire. We're saying the same thing in each of our cultural contexts and each of our ethnic languages and all these various tongues, but we're trying to get to the same thing through different avenues. And so I think that it's just really important to respect each perspective of each generation, because we've all got something unique to offer because of our experience. So happy to be here. Thankful.
Thank you, Nigel. And yeah, commonality is so important, and how that manifests in different generations may be a little different, but in the end, you're right. We all basically want the same thing. And then last we have Lana, our wonderful Lana, and she will introduce herself.
Thank you, Sadia. Hi, friends. I'm Lana. I'm Kurdish American based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I am Preemptive Love Stoner Care Manager. And in terms of something about my generation, I'm Gen Z, by the way. I know in the chat box we mentioned Gen Z being lazy and entitled, but from my point of view, I think that my generation actually happens to be creative and driven in a different way. We've worked so hard on developing this different sense of self-awareness to where we're breaking generational and cultural barriers and normalizing mental health care. And then because we've also grown up in this era, like Alex mentioned, where we grew up with technology, we've sort of like utilized that and combined it with our creativity to create these different avenues and career paths for content creation on social media, or there's professional esports players for video games. And I think that's just like something that's really cool about my generation, is how we're sort of breaking out of these molds and breaking barriers in that sense, and showing that it's okay to be different and unique and accept your whole self as you are. And so, yeah, I'm very proud to be part of Gen Z because of that. And I promise I'm not lazy. I try my best to work hard. It's just might look different than what other generations do. And yeah, throw it back to you, Sadia.
Thank you so much, Lana. And I really appreciate that you have like experienced the difference, and that you are willing to talk to people outside your generation to help bridge those gaps. So now that we've met our 4 wonderful people who belong to 4 different generations, we have a question for you guys. So if Nan could just launch the poll, and the question is, how many living generations do you feel like are out there? So we met 4, so we know that there's at least 4, so you can take the number 3 out of there. So how many are out there right now? All right, yeah, so 5 or 6 seems to be winning. Yeah, so the answer is actually 6. There's 6 living generations out there. So I'm just going to go quickly through each generation that is out there, and I'm not sure how they came up with these names, but our first generation is the greatest generation, and these folks are celebrating their 100+ year birthdays this year, and they actually went through World War I. The funny thing is, the person who was the longest living person actually passed away last week on the 18th. So I was ready for this workshop and I was ready to use her name, and I'm like, oh, that's sad. So she's actually a nun. She was a nun in France, and she died at 118. And I encourage you to look her up and like read about her journey, and how she managed living a life 118 years and doing it so in a fulfilling manner. Then the next one is the silent generation, and they're about 76 years old right now. These are probably our retired friends out there. They served in and remember World War II, and they probably saw a lot of imperial empires rise and fall in their lifetime. And then next we have our baby boomers, who are our 57 to 75-year-olds, and they witnessed the Cold War, JFK's assassination, MLK's assassination. This is a generation that witnessed the civil rights movement. Maybe a lot of them actually participated in the movement, and peace movements, stuff like that. Then next we have our Gen Xers, and that's where I belong. It's our 41 to 56-year-olds, and we are the children of the 70s and 80s. We remember the Challenger disaster and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and we experienced the tech revolution as adults, and I think Alex spoke into that, right? Next, we have our millennials, and they are 25 to 40 years old. They experienced 9/11, a little as adults, or a little younger than adults, around the adult age. And they experienced the Iraq-Afghanistan war, gun violence, racial violence. Next, we have our Gen Zers, or our iGen generation. And these are the kids who are going to talk about COVID, right? This is, they were raised with social media and iPads. The George Floyd murder is something that they would probably have in the front of their mind when you'll ask them as an adult, like, oh, what was it like when you were growing up? A fun fact about the Gen Zers is, in Central Florida, we elected our first Gen Z to represent us in the, House of Representatives. And he is 26 years old, I believe. And we are so excited that he's there because he's bringing the issues that, Gen Zs face to the forefront. And he's going to have to face the challenge of dealing with a lot of other generations in those rooms in Washington. And then lastly, we have our Generation Alpha, and those are our kids who are born in 2013 to present. And we'll see what they remember from the time, when we ask them when they're adults. So those are our generations. So now let's get into our main question. So I'm just going to go through a question, and I'm going to ask each person to answer. So our first question is, what is one major world event that you distinctly remember? So I'm going to ask Cheryl to go first. So Cheryl, what is one major world event that you distinctly remember?
I think the things that happened when I started having children stuck in my mind more than my childhood, because I had a concern for the future of my children. But maybe the Oklahoma City bombing in '95 or 9/11, those came to my mind right away. And although those in other generations obviously can remember that too, it might have hit just a little different being a mother with children and our concern for what the future looked like for families in the country and all that.
Thank you, Cheryl. That is such a good point. When you have, kids and you're thinking about their future, you look at the world, things hit a little differently. Alex, would you like to go next?
9/11, definitely. I was living in New York City at the time, and the owner asked us, myself and another woman, to partner with her and open a cafe that was right at World Trade. And we negotiated that lease the week before, but didn't sign it. And then World Trade happened, and we had a sister restaurant down there, and we were working one day and had to evacuate because they were on the scaffolding. And our doorman was one of the firemen who had the special ropes training, and he was in Time magazine because he could get into the buildings, and supporting him through that time. And he had come off a night shift, and then 9/11 happened, and he jumped on a truck and went down, and to find out where he was, kicked him onto a missing persons list. And I remember, I don't know, maybe that was like that Thursday or Friday night, 2 other waiters, we just went from firehouse to firehouse around Soho looking for our friends. So that was such a profound event in my, earlier adult life. And then I was living abroad during the WikiLeaks. And that started a journey for me of being disabused of American exceptionalism and kind of waking up to what people outside the United States know about our origin story that maybe we don't tell unless you're happy to read our of our own country. And so it was like both of those events felt like it was an end of a period of naivete for me, even though I was probably chronologically too old to really be hanging on to those, those ideas that were so steeped in American exceptionalism. So yeah, those 2 events, they were different kinds of intellectual awakenings.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. And that's funny because I barely remember the WikiLeaks stuff, right? And it is probably because I was in the United States. So I wonder, Nigel, do you remember the WikiLeaks?
Yes, I do. I can't
Oh,
say
you
I'm
do?
super in depth, but I do remember. Yes. I would say a world event that happened here in America was when Trayvon Martin was murdered. And I remember the conviction or lack thereof whenever the George Zimmerman case was like burst wide open. I remember where I was when the verdict was issued. I was 19 years old. This was 10 years ago. And I was working my night job during summer school in college. And I was like devastated. And the girl that I was seeing at the time, she came and picked me up afterwards, and we just kind of like sat in the car, like in silence. Like it was the most awkward ride home. Because I was like, oh my God, like this is like this happened on like a major, yes, national scale, but like it's made international. I've been abroad, you know, in different countries afterwards, and people would ask me about the climate back home in America and what it felt like. And I don't know, it just was a different time. It's very scary. And what would be, I mean, a genesis event, if you will, for a lot of the injustices and, you know, the movements that would happen thereafter. You know, a lot of the stuff that we experienced over the last 2 years, those seeds were planted, you know, during that time. And so it's been interesting being able to have really interesting perspective for the last decade to see, you know, where a lot of that stuff, specifically for me, like I wasn't around for, you know, the Watts riots and things that happened in the 90s or Emmett Till or any of those things. And so it's just to have that type of generational experience be so specific. Yeah, that was a big deal for me.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that so vulnerable. And Trayvon Martin, it's like 15, like the way where he was murdered was like 15 minutes away from my house. And you know, I was an adult, and I remember it distinctly too, just because it hit a different way. So yeah. So Lana, would you like to go next?
Yes. So for this question, the first thing I thought of wasn't really a US event. It was, I guess, a world event. It was like an international thing everybody was paying attention to though. But I mentioned how I'm Kurdish American, so I spent a good portion of my life living in Iraqi Kurdistan, where my family is from. And the first major world event that I thought of, that I can remember so distinctly, was actually Saddam Hussein's execution. I At the time, my family and I were staying with my grandparents on my mom's side of the family, and my grandpa would always have the news on to be showing all the updates and the live news and stuff on Saddam Hussein's trials. And so you're always like up to date on that. I most of the time didn't really understand what was going on during the trials though, because their Kurdish was way too advanced for me to understand. But I knew the tone was very serious. And then I just remember like the day of his execution, everybody was kind of just like holding their breath till like the moment it happened. And once it did, it was kind of like very surreal. Like everybody, I remember, went out on the streets, like crying, shouting and stuff like that, because it was like, I think everybody communally experienced this wave of relief and sense that like this is finally over. I mean, there's like so much trauma that has stemmed from this, and loss and grief and stuff that we'll continue to carry with us moving forward, but at least like we don't have to deal with this fear of this really violent leader overruling us and having us experience more loss and violence and grief. So that for me, I think was a major world event that I could remember very distinctly that came up first to mind.
Thank you for sharing that. Do any of you, the other panelists, remember that incident that Lana spoke about? Yeah. Yeah, I remember it too, but I don't like it. It's obviously like hit different than it might have for you. So let's go to our second question. And our second question is, how do different communication styles, specifically some that are common to your generation, affect peace building, in your opinion? So I'm going to start with Nigel, if it's okay.
The first thing that came to my mind when I seen this question is two things: voice memos and emojis.
Love
but
that.
also memes. And so like they're like, I don't know if everyone's familiar with this, and maybe this will be me talking a different language. There are so many iconic memes that happened in the last decade that are so easy to communicate with in any situation. For example, I don't know if y'all remember this, but maybe like 7 or 8 years ago, Michael Jordan, I think he was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, or he had some wonderful interview that he was doing, and he literally just started crying. And it was like it was like laughing, then it turned into like the ugly cry. And they memed him in the ugly cry. And this meme is just like the absolute best meme. And I mean, it was probably the most utilized meme on the internet for about 5 years straight. I mean, just unbelievable. So I would say memes probably comes first, emojis second, and then probably voice messages.
All right. Yeah. No, now I'm gonna Google that meme because I don't think I've seen it. Cheryl, let's go to you next. What do you think? The different communication
Well,
styles.
on a high level with boomers, your mind instantly goes to we grew up face to face talking more and communicating and reading body language. And when it's all DMs and texts and things like that, you don't have that privilege of getting the vibe of someone and getting the body language and all that. And so that can be it. But also, I think there's a breakdown in communication with some boomers because depending on the culture and country that you live in America, we don't value our aged people as much as other cultures do. And so a boomer can feel pushed to the sideline and not listened to. And so they don't feel heard. And if you can understand that maybe that's why they're digging their heels in on something, because they feel like they're being discounted or pushed to the side because of their age. And so maybe understanding that that in our culture we don't value wisdom and we don't value age like other cultures do. And so when you understand that, if you are trying to talk to a boomer, maybe helping them feel like, no, I really do want to hear what you have to say and what you bring to the table might be helpful if you're trying to talk to a boomer.
Right, right. Yeah. So like kind of putting your judgment aside, right?
Mhm. Right.
Alex, how do you feel? Do you feel like memes are the way or face to face?
Well, I'm much more face to face. I think Gen Xers, because people think we're slackers and because we have like middle child syndromes sandwiched in between these two huge generations on either side, we're more reticent. I don't think that we're the external processors like millennials and Gen Z. And so I think people sometimes think Gen Xers don't care because they're not as vocal about how they're feeling. It's not a generation that was really as encouraged as much to talk about their feelings as younger generations or the next generations are. But we did come of age during a time when mental health awareness became less taboo. To talk in and check in and use that vocabulary, I think, more than boomers or the silent generation. I'm kind of laughing because for some of you know, both my aunts are having pretty aggressive cancer treatments, and my mom has, days of up and down. And I was like, oh, do you want to talk about it? Do you want to tell me how you're feeling? And she laughed at me. She's like, I'm not of your generation. So, we're kind of all in the way we communicate, but I think having the wherewithal to check in and try different techniques can help bridge those generation gaps.
I love that. Yeah, checking in and kind of meeting the person where they're at, right? It's so important. Lana, would you like to go next?
Yeah. So I think for my generation, I can relate with Nigel's memes and emojis. It's kind of like our love language, I guess. But another thing, and Alex pointed out to this, we are very much external processors. So we'll just like chat and chat to like let stuff out and process what we need to process. But I mentioned earlier how we have grown up in a time of technology, and there are so many tools out there for us to be on calls or communicate with one another and have fun. There's this sort of like app or program called Discord that my friends and I use. It's basically like you have a specific chat server and there's voice chat channels in there and also different like texting chat channels in there as well. You could dump memes and videos and stuff on there to have fun. But my friends and I will be in those voice calls for hours and hours on end playing video games and stuff with one another. And at times we'll just go into random deep discussions, and I'll learn that like although my friends and I are of the same generation, we have very different upbringings and experiences, and so we do still tend to be very different from one another. And I think, you know, being on those calls hours on end with my friends and seeing that, you know, we still care for one another and accept and love each other, that's impacted my ability to, as a peacemaker, even with those that are, you know, of different generations and different than me, have the ability and confidence to be like, okay, like I'm very different from some of my friends and we still have the ability to like listen intently to one another and accept one another. I could do this with my other peers that are also of different generations and stuff with me, and have this ability and confidence to like, I guess, bridge the divide between us in that sense. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Lana. And it speaks into what Nigel said earlier, like proximity is what like actually opens your mind and your perspective on something that's not what you experience. So this third question that I'm going to ask, also I wanted to speak into the question that we just asked. There was a study that took a poll of teenagers, and the teenagers, the majority of the teenagers felt like they would like to communicate over text instead of face-to-face. And over the years, it's gone up from like 32% to 49%, right? So that's what they prefer. And if you are a boomer trying to raise a teenager, like you're just like, no, face-to-face is it, right? So there has to be like the meeting of the minds, or coming to the middle as far as, you know, communication styles go. So our next question is, what is a challenge that you have experienced with generations outside your own? And I want to ask Alex and Cheryl first, keeping this question in mind, with the age of TikTok and social media, do you feel like you've been challenged or you feel like you cannot relate at times, you know, when you're trying to reach across the generational divide? So Alex, would you like to go first?
I don't have a problem saying what I don't know how to use, some in terms of social media, and I have found that people just help you when you say, I don't know how to do this, can you show me? Where I think sometimes, you know, if we're feel embarrassed or vulnerable to say we don't know something, especially if we're older, then we don't ask for that help and we get left out. So for me, that's not a challenge. I'll just speak for myself. I do find that I become internally frustrated with some of the external processing. No offense to anyone. I know it's my issue. I'll work myself. But in a professional environment, I find myself a bit frustrated with it. In a personal environment, but maybe that's just a, you know, part of how I was raised and the generation I was brought up in, and differences of work ethics and work environments, which have been distorted, if not annihilated, by COVID and the transition to online and hybrid working, remote working environments. So for me, that's a challenge. And in terms of relating to communicating with people who are older generations than I think it goes back to listening and making space. I don't always agree with the points of view. I liked when you brought up earlier, Sadia, about language, and if we're using the wrong terms, like cut somebody some slack, because terms that are now today offensive perhaps weren't when other people were younger, and it's more habitual. So I just this idea to remember to have I guess some empathy goes a long
Mhm.
way when we're trying to communicate.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, and relentlessly humanizing the person in front of you, right? We talked about this in the beginning. Cheryl, I would like to ask you the same question.
Yeah, it's interesting because you know how words can take on new meanings, like the name Karen has changed from a woman's name to an insult. And boomer has done that somewhat. I see that a lot online of like, okay, boomer, and it's a put down. It's inferring you're fumbling, don't know what you're doing, and you're out of touch. And it is a little frustrating because even in that video we watched, that crotchety old woman that couldn't figure out her pills were so much more than that, and we aren't the same grandparents that were our grandparents were, where they just settled into a rocking chair. We're out there knocking things out, being activist and doing all kinds of things. And so being named a boomer as an insult is a little frustrating at times. I would count myself as a unicorn boomer, where I fight against the desire to just settle into what I've always known. I'm on TikTok every day. I love TikTok. My husband and I have a couple of TikTok accounts, and I love knowing where the world is going. I self-taught myself coding and things like that so that I could create a website. And so I think if other generations stop and listen to what we're saying, they realize, oh wow, they're not what I thought they were, And I have my son-in-law said, you are one weird boomer. He said, yeah, I mean, in a good way. He said, you know so much that I wouldn't expect from someone your age, but it's because I've made that choice to stay relevant, to learn new things. And so I would just ask that people look at the individual
Mhm.
and see who they are, and find out, wow, they're actually sort of awesome and they're doing amazing things. And they're an ally to me as a Gen Z or whatever, am trying to navigate through the world. They actually care about me and are trying to support a better way in the world. So
Oh, I love that. And I love that you succinctly put it, like we are so much more than that. So I think that's something that we all hold when we are thinking about how we're being perceived in the world. So Lana and Nigel, I'm going to ask you both the same question. And I'm going to also ask you, have you noticed a resentment towards your generation? So Lana, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. I think for me, I think in a professional space is where I experience a lot of challenges. Um, there's definitely, I could get the sense that my older colleagues will either talk down at me, or even I've had um, former coworkers that have straight up like told me, oh, you don't know what you're doing. You're like too young and stuff like that. And I myself try my best to grow as much as if I'm in a managerial position, do the best I can and continue growing in that managerial position. But even if I'm not in a managerial position, I consider myself a leader and try my best to grow as a leader. And so when I have older colleagues that look down on me or talk down on me, mansplain, or even just again say directly, you don't know anything, it's insanely discouraging. And I've had times where I've like mentally broken down and have started like contemplating like, what am I doing with my life? Where am I? Why am I doing this? And I had to work so hard on like realizing like them talking down at me and stuff like that isn't a reflection of me and who I am. It's more of stuff they probably need to work on. And I can work on also communicating that I find it disrespectful and it's, not something that's uplifting me and helping me grow. And maybe they genuinely don't know how unhealthy and hurtful their words are. And so I can still do my best to try and communicate that. And that's also like an impact I can have as a younger person to the older generation, is just trying my best to communicate. But yeah, that's been, I think, one of the biggest challenges for me in the personal space, is just trying my best not to be completely discouraged when I'm feeling like I'm being looked down upon in that sense because of my age.
Thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably. And like Afnan said, this is the other face of ageism. We always assume that it's always like we're being awful to the older folks. I mean, the roles can be reversed, right? Nigel.
This is one, y'all, like, there's this, okay, so let me start here. Just follow me because I'm going somewhere. Despite how you might feel about Malcolm X, he graduated from the 8th grade and then he dropped out of school afterwards, did not have a high school diploma. We all know he went on to be an incredible historic figure. He's recognized for a lot of the work that he did, specifically empowering communities of color, the Black community. He was flown out by sheiks and did peacemaking with many nations. He did all kinds of work all across. The man had a 8th grade middle school education, okay? The one, I start with that because I think one of the things that I personally have experienced, and a lot of people who are in the millennial generation that I'm connected to have experienced, is there is like this gatekeeping that occurs to, if you don't have the resume, if you're too young, if you're too aspirational and ambitious, it's almost like a smudge from individuals and organizations alike. And so it's wild that like we have 17 and 18-year-old kids who are making millions of dollars on YouTube and TikTok and social media that are running incredible businesses. But if those same kids applied to get a job in corporate America, or they wanted to make a lateral move over into a particular industry, there would be some sense of like gatekeeping, or you're too young, take your time and build up, versus like, no, this person is gifted, they have raw talent, they can be teachable. And this is why you have a lot of millennials who are doing the quiet quitting thing right now. They're showing up and doing the bare minimum because they're not seen or valued and acknowledged in the ways that they want to be. And so I think one of the challenges is the ambition that is coming out of the millennial generation, and has for some time, has been one of the things that has turned off a lot of other generations that are kind of like at the helm of authority, if you will, in a lot of like tech spaces or corporate spaces, or even like nonprofit. I've had a lot of stuff that I've witnessed in nonprofit and ministry spaces, just for being an ambitious person. So I say all that very jumbled because this is one of the things is, I'm sorry, y'all, this has pissed me off like to the maximum, if I'm just being honest with you. It's like, whatever happened to taking a chance on people or meeting people where they are and seeing the gifts and talents and skill set and offerings that they could provide, versus being like, pay your dues and get in line because this is the way that it used to be and this is the way that it still is. And there are a lot of incredible dreamers out there that have got washed out in oversaturated markets because somebody didn't take a chance on them, or a lot of incredible organizations that have lost really, really incredible employees because the employee just wanted an opportunity and hustled and grinded and did the best that they absolutely could and just felt like they were overlooked and underappreciated. So welcome to my TED Talk.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think Erin said it so nicely. How do we become door openers instead of gatekeepers, right? And as I read that, we're going to jump into our rapid fire 2 tips as we leave, because now we're at the 1 hour mark. So 2 tips from each person for all of us to help communicate with your generation better. So we're going to do this really fast, and then we're going to try to get everybody out the door in like 3 minutes. So Cheryl, would you like to go first? What are your 2 tips?
Well, I don't know if it's 2, but my thought that comes to mind is none of the generation holds all the wisdom and all the knowledge. We all bring something to the table. And when we allow ourselves to open up to different thought and to know the love language or the communication, know the communication ability of that age range, we will allow so much more into our lives. And so understanding that whatever generation we're in does not hold all the wisdom, and that by opening up to each of the generations, we make a more well-rounded world that can move forward together in a peaceful way.
Love that. So wise. Alex.
Empathy, always empathy, and yes. So yes, this person can teach me something. So you're inherently open, like is it an improv? Yes, and.
Yes, and I love that. Nigel. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Let us buy you a cup of coffee,
Okay.
or buy us a cup of coffee. However it works. Whoever wants to do that. I think a great connecting point. It's like, I know some people don't drink coffee, but I swear 99% of the communities that I exist in where millennials are, coffee is the cornerstone. So if you want to have a great conversation, you want to sit down and connect with some folks, just do it over a cup of coffee. And if, the conversation's bad, you got a meeting, you know what I'm saying? You got to be at, and you can run, but the coffee is a great connection point.
Oh, no, I love that. Yeah, grab a coffee. Lana.
I love that, Nigel. That's so beautifully put. But yeah, I think just having patience with us sometimes. We're still, for us younger generations, we're still learning and growing, and this world has like grown to have so many different possibilities and options for us. So if we don't necessarily are still trying to figure out who we are and what we want to do, please be patient with us. And we'd love some, I guess, just some guidance and like welcoming on our journeys to figure out who we are, but also kind of like similar to what Nigel was saying about having a cup of coffee with people. Like, I love asking those that are older than me their stories and wisdom and advice that they have, but also like I really appreciate and love when that's reciprocated back to me and people allow me to share my journey and my story and the wisdom and stuff that I have to offer, because again, kind of like Cheryl said, not all of us, not each one generation has all of the wisdom, but I think all of us put together, we have so much to share, and collectively can just like become the best people can be when we gather together and open that space up for one another. So yeah, if I ask you a question, please feel free to ask me a question back. I'm always willing to be vulnerable and share.
I love that, Lana. So patience, listening, and wondering. That's what I heard in your answer. So thank you. Thank you. We hope that everybody got some tips out of that. I know I did. And we're just going to wrap up now. So what's next? So there's a lot of studies, there's a lot of articles about this. It was very overwhelming, and I'm just amazed on how many studies there have been on ageism. In our follow-up email, we will send you some resources. We will send you like a questionnaire that you can take to figure out where you stand in all of this and what you can do better. And our second tip is to find an older, younger friend to have a candid conversation with and use what you learned here. Like Nigel said, look into coffee together. And our third tip is join our Love Anyway workshops beginning February 15th. The registration will be in the follow-up email, and we challenge you to bring somebody with you who is of a different generation, so we can actually start building community with that person. And then before you leave, we would like you to take one final poll question. If Nan could pull that up really quick. And there will be the survey that is coming, the full survey that is coming to your email. So once again, if you filled out the pre-survey and the post-survey, you might get a gift from us, which is awesome. Awesome. And last but not least, this is how to reach us. If you would like to join a gathering, I know Lana and Cheryl talked about their online gathering. Contact us or them. We'll help you get connected with them and us. Follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on all the social media. We try our best to, keep connected in the different ways through different generations. If you want to meet in person with me, come to Florida. I will hang out with you because I like face-to-face as well. Thank you so much to our illustrious panel. You guys are amazing. Thank you for everybody who attended, who shared so vulnerably. We appreciate you. we hope to see you at the workshop in February 15th. You guys are amazing. Keep in touch. Don't be a stranger.